All right, ladies and gentlemen, I just sent you a announcement on Canvas. So in order to address some of your concerns, some of you are in different time zone, some of you have a lot of issue going on with yourself or your families. We understand that we're in a very special time, but I just want to give you as much comfort as possible. So I sent this general guidance on midterm just 30 minutes ago, maybe. So basically I have three things in here. A PDF attached. It will address some of your concern on essay question, ID question. We listed some expectations and common pitfalls on both sections, so you can have a sense of what you can do in ID. So we want you to spend only 40% of your time on ID and 60% for the essay. So don't spend too much time on ID, since you have four different, you can choose 4 out of like 10 or 12 concepts. So first of all, the tips. Basically, we want you to have a very holistic grasp of the course materials. Don't just focus on some tiny points. Try to have a bigger picture by reading the syllabus closely. So it will help you navigate some readings and materials for the essay question. The essay questions are usually very broad, but are very relevant to what we have discussed, particularly on scenes and trust issue in Tocqueville reading. So basically, don't just focus on tiny points. Try to have a sense of what this course is about. For the ID question, many of you asked me how to prepare for IDs. So go to the PDF and read 3 tips on ID answers. Don't spend too much time on that. Make sure that your time split is 40% and 60% for the 2 sections. Yeah, as a question will be very broad, so don't worry about not being able to regurgitate some tiny points you learn in this course. There are some special notes. Your time is about 1 hour and 20 minutes. That's our full class time, from 4:30 to 5:50. That's for the most students. Make sure you have 5 minutes for Canvas submission. We won't deduct any points if you are late for 2 or 3 minutes, but if you have some technical issue, make sure you send us email and explain a bit about your issue. So if you are a non-native speaker or you have any disability issue, so you can put it on the first page, and preferably using red color, so we can see it very clearly, and we won't deduct any points from your late submission. So if you're in a different time zone, that's important. I guess some of you are in Saudi or in Japan. You have very different time zone. So make sure you send us an email 30 minutes before your specified study time. So if your time is not specified, send us email as soon as you can. We will negotiate a time like 5 hours before the regular time or 4 hours after the regular time. Depends on your time zone and your and how much what specific time you want on that particular day. So finally, make sure don't plagiarize. There are university regulations on that. We want you to write original essay. It's an open book exam. You have a lot of search tools, but you only have very limited time. So don't search too much. Try to strike a balance. And there is a midterm review PDF in here, and you can download and take a close look on that. That's it.
Any questions on the exam administration side for for Alan? Thank you for that. Jim and
question from
Brandon.
Ola. Yeah, for non-native students, you will flag that on the first page of the exam. You will be given 20 minutes extra. So that's for every non-native speaker students.
Good. Here's another one. Anyone else with a question?
Yeah, if you want, yeah, question from Diane King. If you want to take the course pass or fail, should we contact you by email? Yeah, that's also included in the PDF. So it should inform us 1 day before the regular exam. So you can just email us today or tomorrow.
If we have a series of bigger questions, yeah, there's another one there. Are you going to post example?
So in the tips, I just gave you 2 possible candidates for ID. One is BUS, another is New Political Culture. They are, candidates for ID. So I also gave you a suggestion, just read all the syllabus, and we also glean key concepts from the syllabus. So that's the best place to go. And remember, it's open book exam. If you don't even know where that concept is from, that probably is an issue with your familiarity with the reading. So make sure you know the readings, and make sure you know some basic concepts coming from the readings. Yeah, so how long? Yeah, length is not always the issue. Some people just regurgitate some points without any original contribution. In the essay, we would simply ignore that parts. So it depends on how original your essay is and how engaged you put different readings together. And also there are some suggestions for the structure in the PDF. Usually you will start by introducing the particular question or the question in the prompt. And what are some pitfalls you may have in answering the essay question. There is a question on whether student can take the course pass or fail before the final. Yeah, because you can always choose to write a paper. Some people prefer writing a paper so they don't take exam. So they have a final say, like 1 day before the final to take the pass or fail, or just take regular score. Yeah. So Jimmy, could you help students go through the steps on Canvas where they can see the exam, since you set it up? I think it's in quiz, but now it's invisible to students. But Jimmy knows everything. He set it up. Jimmy? We cannot hear you. Maybe your microphone is not on.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Oh, sorry about that. If you go to the Canvas site, click assignments, there will be section 2020. And under that, there will be a post 2020 midterm.
Do you
That's
want to
where,
just share your screen?
but it's not on there yet. It's
Oh, it's not
only,
available yet? Okay.
no.
Yeah, I think
Or at least,
maybe we
Because
send students an email telling them where it is on Canvas. For students who are in different time zone for a specified time, they will receive an email for the exam. But for most students taking regular,
or maybe we could,
Yeah.
maybe we could just have like a screenshot or something.
yeah, that's a great idea.
Okay.
I'll do that.
Sure. So any other question? No. Okay, will everyone get the letter grade for midterm? I want to make the decision after knowing the grade. Yeah, you will get a letter grade for the midterm. So pass or fail is always a choice until one day before the final.
Well, I think that it's the, I would have to look it up, but I think that the college used to have a policy that was like the third week or fifth week or something, people had to say if they were taking a course pass fail. I believe that's been extended to ninth week, like that decision. I have to go look at it. Also, does anyone have like questions about like the content of like the course, like the stuff that we've read that we're here to like learn about together, rather than these like bureaucratic things?
Yeah, that's the point we're here today. Yeah.
So it's like, you know, so it's like you can ask these questions about like, yeah, I'll just say that.
So Gabe Solis asked the question. I think Brandon might have better sense of the past example of the exam. Brandon took the exam like several years ago. Would you address that question?
It's like, I don't know. Okay, so it's like so what is happening here is that it's like, so academia is like, there's like two things that happen. One is you have to know like what people are arguing and saying. So that's like what the ID questions are. These are like key terms for someone, and you know, just like give us like a sense of like what that idea is, why it's important for us and what we're doing here. And then the essay questions are like putting things in conversation with one another, or like applying things to different cases or stuff like that. So that it's like the essays will be like asking you to do some of that work of like pushing authors into new territory, either through cases or by bringing them into conversation with other authors around, you know, the topics of the course. Does that I don't know if that helps or not. It's like, I'm not sure like how, I'm not sure like whether like giving you like some example of like what an essay question has been like in the past will be helpful for you, because any example is obviously going to be different than whatever is on the midterm, and the only thing that that would communicate is like what I just said, that the essay will be like an exercise in application, like using stuff to try to understand things that are going on in the world, or bringing people into conversation with one another, I think are like two ways of thinking about it. And then we had, I had a question sent to me privately about the Benjamin reading, but didn't say something specific about the Benjamin reading. Did other people have like issues with that reading, or like something like in particular? I don't know. You can like, or if you had something you thought was really great about the Benjamin reading, maybe you can share that and help our friend who will remain nameless given that they sent this to me privately. Does that? Yes, no.
Well, I can screen share the Benjamin reading if any question regarding some specific points. I think the reading is about the arcade project, and part of it is on Fresnel, I guess that's the French.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Haussmann project, Fresnel,
We had
Baudelaire.
a video on the Haussmann project, remember?
Yeah,
Haussmann was the organizer, the political top leader, thinking this through. The idea of Bohemia was there.
So this is kind of like, you know, it's like, this isn't like a class on Benjamin or the Frankfurt School or any of these things. So it's like, the thing to bear in mind is like, what in this, like, what in this essay is like important to like what we're doing. So it's like, did we assign this because we want you to know about some like weird architectural things that were like happening in Paris? Like, not really. This isn't like a class on like weird architectural things. But it's through looking at, you know, Baudelaire, through looking at the weird architectural thing and some other things. It's like we're seeing the growth of a certain kind of sensibility that is embodied for Benjamin in figures like the Flaner. And this idea of like urban space as being something that it's not just getting from, you know, point A to point B, but there's this like, you know, the Flaner as someone who's like walking, looking at things, seeing the new, you know, what's going on. It's like, that's like a change in like individual orientation or like subjectivity, we might say, that seems to invite a new kind of organization of cities, or at the very least like a different orientation to you know, cities, these things that didn't already exist. Did already exist. I don't know if this is like helpful. It's like it's sort of hard to like, it's like the more specific the questions are, it's like the easier it is to respond to them.
But you can all see here in the underlines that Alan has done very sensitively, big concepts, consumption, perspective inside the mind of the flaneur is the person walking around and looking and thinking about it. So the USC is classically doing this. That is what do we see in Chicago or in ancient Greece or Cairo, and what makes them distinctive in terms of bigger concepts and meanings. So ideas of a dramatic statement in an architectural edifice, as we saw in China or in the pyramids or the Eiffel Tower. These are helpful in place making, of defining the place, but in a way that makes it distinctive. And so, so Paris then was studied in more detail, of course, here with these key concepts like Bohemia, with the, and then as well, we have interspersed with this, in this essay on Paris, some traditional Marxist interpretations. So Haussmann is discussed not only as doing aesthetics, he's also given credit for tearing down the narrow streets where people might foment a revolution or throw bombs at you, and instead to have bigger boulevards where the army with its horses and so forth could fight secure, as it says here, secure against civil war. And they had a number of some of the most world famous civil wars, 1789, 1848 in Paris. Okay, those are not original to Benjamin, but I'm making the point that he started himself from a Marxist perspective in writing this, but he went to Paris and he kept on studying it because the simple Marxist analysis did not seem to work, or it was not enough. It seemed to give some meaning, but it didn't say why Paris had said no to smokestacks and refused to build industries and manufacturing the way the English cities were overwhelmed by, and many people at the time were saying, look at England, it's the leading country in the world and leading us into industrialization and the modern world. And Paris said, no, we don't want that if you get smoke. This is a beautiful city, and that's the most important thing to preserve. All right, starting from that premise, people laughed at the French, if you will, in some countries of the world then, and in, say, the mid-20th century. But in the 21st century now, the Chinese huge economy are transforming the whole economy in the same consumption direction of thinking about domestic issues. And how do these differ from building more widgets or building more shoes? So products are being replaced by the broader conception of their meaning, their aesthetics, and these are found in many ways that we've seen through the course. And they go back to the Greeks and the ancient Greeks and Romans, but they just to become massively democratized in redefining rural life in China, rural life in small town Iowa or downstate Illinois. You can do this in those places and still write poetry or be a computer web designer in a high mountain in Colorado and so forth. And
Yeah.
that kind of background leads into much of the integrating. These are big integrating themes, such as Brandon talked about through the whole course, and Alan did. Other questions? Yeah, I can. I'll just warn the others. At least on my chat, I only see the first two lines if either someone could read the lines below 1 and 2 or tell me how to how to see that, I'd be grateful.
Yeah, so some people have been sending me questions privately, and I just dropped them in the box. Hopefully that's okay, preserves anonymity. So one of these, I have a pretty specific question in reference to the Haesoon reading. It talked about the idea of Bohemia and its impact on public transit and walkability. But I'm wondering if its bigger picture argument is that Bohemia and its consequential impacts are taking over and becoming the new normal, or war before COVID, or are they more conflicting with the most World War II norms, push towards suburban life and away from walkability public transit? In other words, is Bohemia taking over or just becoming more prevalent?
Yeah, I can take that on if you want, Brandon.
Sure.
Okay, I would say both, all of the above, but the way of resolving the apparent conflict in my answer is that we can find each of these in different neighborhoods and in different people in the same neighborhood. So it may be that for some, Bohemia is seen as a threat or a political or social lifestyle conflict. For others, in the case especially of Haesoon is pointing this out, she's looking not so much for what the goth girl stressed of the bigger lifestyle issues. Haesoon is pointing really to very specific things like putting art at the entrance of subways, or how especially to take some of the most dangerous and feared aspects of cities related to security in the US, like subways and getting in and out of a subway entrance, and look then at how these have been successfully redesigned in other locations around the world. And she's worked in cities in specifically Paris, Seoul, and Chicago. So she contrasts them with photographs, with images, with all kinds of things in lots of detail. And so and she uses a looser, much, I'd say, watered down, or let's say not confrontational for the most part, aspect of Bohemia, which fits with the more general Asian style and her own Asian background. She's Korean. At the same time, she uses the positive example of Seoul and the subways, where they're the most safe and the most inviting of all of the three cities, as well as most others around the world, in that the Seoul government has given subsidies to sponsor and then to play up on websites and the like the bands which have concerts. They're little, then around them they're little bookstores. Nearby the entrance, there are cafes. There are 18,000 cafes which have sprung up all over Seoul, transforming the entire city of Seoul. This is something like 10 times the number of cafes there are in Paris or New York. So for places like Chicago, we can learn from Seoul. That is, what can we do without necessarily saying we have to eliminate crime or eliminate racial conflict? That's instead of talking about that in such conflictual terms, one can look for things of what do we share? We share the bicycle path. We can share the image of the lake. We can share having concerts at the entrance of a subway, as they're doing in Seoul. We can share divvy bike riding. And these we can share bike lanes, and we can share good restaurants, nightclubs. And thus Chicago has now attracting more visitors to conventions and then staying on than, means New York ranks something like 17th, and Chicago's 2 or 3 along with the big convention centers. So and the second, Chicago is new in doing this. Chicago does not have this grand tradition of being a tourist mecca in the 19th century. This was a dirty, dangerous place that people came here to be shocked at how the city was. But Chicago and the university now in the last 5 or 10 years has dramatically embraced the arts, but in doing so, in thinking about it, in conceptualizing the broader meaning of how can we bring and transform the meaning of a subway into an inviting cultural edifice with art at the entrance, with music playing, with lots of people cheering and laughing, listening to a comedian along with the bands as you come into the subway. This, and as they do in Seoul, and the Koreans have done this in ways that they are the model across Asia. That is, their talk shows, the so-called Korean wave of bands are partially created by the bands themselves, but the government has then helped to spread them further, and they've been embraced initially across Asia, but then at least one of the famous rap songs was the #1 rap song ever on YouTube. Okay, so that's a quick answer about Heesun. Yeah, we didn't have that much of a session on her. If there's more, if we want to come back to that later today, we can even do a little more on that. As it does, I mean, the question is good to help us bring this out and link it to the rest of the course, as it fits perfectly.
Yeah, I think that relates to a follow-up I got on the Benjamin. So seemed like that was kind of, so you're asking about the public and the private in Benjamin. And it's like, I don't know how many of you have like been to Paris, but it's like, everything's very small. It's like people's apartments are very small. So it's like, which a consequence of that is like a lot of people don't like spending a lot of time at home. So there's like a huge amount of like people in public all the time. So even if you haven't been to Paris, if you've been to like New York, especially like Manhattan, a lot of it has like a similar feeling where people are outside a lot of the time. And so I think that there gets to be this like sort of like I don't know, like blending or like destabilization of some we might think of as like public and private. And so it's one of the things that I think is interesting about Benjamin is how he combines this thing which feels like very kind of abstract and impersonal, like architecture, the plan of a city, with, you know, the stuff that Baudelaire's talking about, which is like this very like individualistic, sort of like intense, like, you know, radically subjective thing, or it seems to be radically subjective. And it's sort of like the confluence of those two things. So I'll just drop this in. I don't think we talked about this. So this is just Paris Street Rainy Day, which is in the Art Institute, which you could go see under different conditions, but it's a very famous painting. And so you can see kind of like some of the geometric lines of Haussmann's Paris, like before the Haussmann before the Haussmann thing happened. Paris was this very medieval city, so there was it's not at, you know, like the grid that we get in cities like Chicago and especially like New York, Manhattan. But we have like a lot of these lines that like Terry kind of alluded to with these, you know, that kind of comes from this like political anxiety of, you know, wider boulevards mean people can't build barricades and things like that, dramatized to great effect in the musical theater show Les Miserables, but about the adapted from the Victor Hugo novel. But here, you know, so it's like you have these people that are kind of like scattered at random, you know, being cut off by the edges of the plain, like living, you know, their life. And I think it's like the kind of combination of, you know, that like a lot of that public private stuff is like wrapped up in a lot of this, and like thinking about, you know, public space as something that's not just kind of like this utilitarian thing, but is something that is like pleasing to look at or that people would want to spend time in, which goes to a lot of the third place kind of stuff. And I don't know, you can even think about places like Whole Foods, which I'm kind of old enough to have seen the full trajectory of, from kind of like a grocery store to like this grocery store / they have these bar areas / you can eat there. It's like you want to like, you know, go get your groceries, like hang out, eat something. It has all these like clean, sleek, like minimalist type aesthetics. So I think that, I'm sorry, I'm like kind of just free associating now, but I thought I would bring that up. We had a question on the effect of changing cultural scenes on political participation. Do you want to do that, Terry, or does someone else want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. If you could read the full question.
They just, I'll drop it in the chat again, but it just said, what is the oh, sorry, that's a different one. Hi, can you elaborate on the effect of changing cultural scenes on political participation? So that was all I got.
Okay, well, this is most directly in the Ken Tuckville karaoke book in general, and then in specific chapters on political participation. And the core idea, of course, was Tuckville, that America was different. America was a democracy with active citizen participation, even though maybe what 20-30% of the adults voted in the early 19th century. But why and how did it work? And his basic answer was that local people in small towns in Western Massachusetts would build a fence together, go to church together, go to a town meeting, which was a generally semi-required city council meeting where citizens would participate, sit in not just the background, but the foreground. And the ideal, the moralistic ideal of the New England town meeting was that it was everyone's ethical duty to show their views, participate, and the ideal then of the town was to reach, if not unanimity in the Quaker meeting literal sense, at least to try to reformulate policies so that they were more generally consensual, so that it was not 49 against 51 in voting and say, we won, therefore we're going to force this on top of you, because even if you try to do that, you may change the coalition. In the case of the U.S. or most of the world, you can just mobilize non-voters, and so that transforms anything that's close. And so and what's interesting then is how we're now getting sometimes the opposite of this, ostensibly with President Donald Trump, who is often not following these efforts to build consensus. He's still continuing his style of attacking and creating conflict, such as with the Chinese now, in ways that many people would find at least inconsistent with the generally past tradition of certainly the New England subculture within the U.S. Part of the Southern subculture, however, is to preserve more honor and to fight those people that you may have fought with in the past, and more concerned with status than with consensus in tradition. And this is the background of as they say, the American military speaks with a Southern accent historically and even today. And Trump likes and models some of this on the military. But Trump is also expressing, this is the Elazar kind of interpretation, the Middle Atlantic market, the contract. His most famous book is called The Art of the Contract. So what I'm doing is laying out and answering the question, 3 conceptions inside the US of competing conceptions of why do people and how do people participate. One is the Quaker meeting. The second is the South with hierarchy and honor. And the third is the market. And this is most of all Trump's idea of the contract, that one contract you can do in isolation. And so this is a public-private strong segmentation, not just private, but one specific contract which the 2 parties can ignore the next day in an extreme version of this idea of each deal is a different deal. So Trump says all the time, Obama made a bad deal in doing that. I'm not going to follow it at all. I want to do something different. and he's done that with Iraq, Iran, China, etc. in ways in healthcare. And in that sense, he's reframing it not in terms of the underlying shared values. He's framing it in terms of an atomized, specific discussion, negotiation, which was formalized in a contract. So in that sense, the rationale of how this relates to participation is shifting within each of those three kinds of scenes, you could call them here. And so the rationale of the first is closer to Jane Jacobs, who reminded us of Tocqueville and reminded us in confronting, again, another New Yorker, Robert Moses was sort of the very authoritarian, you could say Trump-like director of the Port of New York Authority, and he wanted to build a big expressway right across the middle of Lower Manhattan and destroy Greenwich Village. Okay, so if you try to think of someone trying to get rid of these goth Greenwich Village poets and so forth, what could be better than build a freeway right through the middle of Greenwich Village? So Jane Jacobs there went out in the street with her friends and started protesting, and she won the day, not only in that one battle against Moses, who most everyone else said, no one can beat Robert Moses. He always wins. She won and beat him, but more generally, her model of the citizens can mobilize against something if it can be shown to be wrong, and she essentially showed how to do this in ways that continue with social media, in ways that even the Chinese national government listens very attentively to social media, in ways that are an international model, as we've seen with many of our videos and the presentations by Qi Ji and Bo Chen in Wuhan, where we had the slides from him showing how the Chinese have dramatically changed. They're focusing on how to make people in villages be more comfortable in their home villages and not feel they have to go to a capital city. So in illustrating simply the magnitude of change, it doesn't have to be Haussmann and architecture. You can add a video to a public library in a town of 2,000 and transform the meaning of the public space in the town and give residents there a sense of participating in movies they can choose from, or news or other things, which is available internationally through, even if they don't, but something like 60% of everyone in China has cell phone access. But for those who don't, they can go to a public library, etc. So, and his survey showed the favorite activities of rural Chinese are television, surfing the internet, downloading games and videos and things of that sort. That is, they're very different to many university graduates in Western Europe and the US. So the image of rural China is inconsistent with what that new survey shows of something like 80,000 people across China. So looking at these in ways that place, and as both Qi Ji and Bo Chen have said, the Chinese, the government, the analysts, the local policymakers. I'll add one more point there on local. That is, many have discussed China as a sort of monolithic, party-structured decision-making entity, but at least some of the things which I've read stress that the key decisions in China were made by the local party leaders. And it's city by city, the pattern's different. And they may have had to, they negotiated with ministries and with people in Beijing and so forth. But that there was a localism which Donald Trump is now turning over to the states. So rather, in contrast to France, Spain, the more national European states, the US and China have both, I sense, decentralized many of these decisions, such as who can go out when, under what circumstances, and how to handle specific policies in ways that may have some local specificity and sensitivity to them if the local officials also follow things like the internet and other, clearly how much each follows citizens versus interest groups versus unions versus a party or etc., will vary from place to place. But so the quick answer of the one more general point of these examples I'm giving is places differ, local areas differ, and that's what is ideal for seeing new things being tried out on at least an experimental basis. And if they work well, then you can diffuse them and other people will be encouraged by the success to adopt them and embrace them in other locations, or adapt them in ways that they will work in a new place. So citizen participation thus can be driven by consensus, by having your friends say, let's go out and vote together, or put more generally, the one big point which I started off with the last chapter of Kentuckville Karaoke is to rethink citizen participation or political participation as not just voting. It is also protest. So the Hong Kong protests in China are very active, deliberate, media-seeking political participation with huge potential implications for all of China. So in that sense, protest fits that. And this is something where artists and bohemians can have classically played a leading role. The 19th century romantics, Nietzsche, Wagner, many others, they were active in the 1848 revolutions, and they spent the next decade or so living outside Germany. Marx, of course, wrote the Communist Manifesto for 1848 for the Revolution. And then spent the rest of his life as a political emigre, etc. So the point is diversity leading to extreme patterns where you can contrast. So famous books and novels, A Tale of Two Cities, contrasting London with Paris, that Paris had the revolution, London did not. London had more involvement, responsiveness, and more generally, the English style of political leadership, as Habermas points out, really encouraged this kind of different styles of participation. So that the last chapter there simply lists many different forms of political and civic participation, which are broader than voting. And so many of these are applicable to, here we go, trust in political institutions, social trust, the engaged, duty, sort of these are participation in this one, and then solidarity, civic engagement, and so forth. And if you scroll, can you scroll up one line just to the heading of that, Alan? This is now here. That's it. Or stop right there. This is the underline in red is the class politics context. That is, we look at the strength of these coefficients in different contexts. So in places where class politics is stronger, then we find these variables with the little stars on them become more important. Or or we find that the arts, for example, is positively, significantly active, important in heightening potentially protest within a class politics context and within a new political culture context. So in that sense, we have boxes within boxes. And so how the arts work depends on whether you're in a subway in Seoul or a subway in Chicago, but how then to change not just the concert or the subway entrance, but to change the whole way of thinking about it is what we're dealing explicitly in some readings, such as Benjamin on Paris or Habermas on the England versus the continent, in the deep ways that the English, by focusing on practicality in their cafes, on taking bets on whether or not a ship would return, then auctioning the price of the goods in all the holdings in a ship, were linked with the political and economic institutions very directly. In contrast, on the continent, this did not happen because, here we go, the private realm and the sphere is public authority. This is from
Habermas.
Habermas. Okay, fine. So we have the Yeah, these are excellent little bits of underline. The court was never able to dominate the town as it had in France of the Sun King. The town and gown, the simplest immediate thing to focus on is the alternative to that is the court. The court was the dominating model in many of the big continental countries, with Versailles and Paris as the lead example internationally, followed in Eastern Europe and Russia and Vienna and so forth. By contrast, in England, it was the coffee house and the linking with political tracts and protest of Hobbes, Locke, etc., writing about how can we build legitimacy without having a strong state, etc. And so these things were debated actively in in England at the same time. And so that form of political participation was strong in London and in England, with 600 coffee shops, whatever, in London. Whereas on the continent, where political freedom was much more limited, censorship was stronger. You couldn't publish lots of books or lots of tracts in many continental countries. And therefore, related to that, what people talked about was much more lifestyle, elegance, good taste, having the style of a conversation perhaps be as important as the content. So we had the brief video on the salon in 19th century France, taken out of the novel of Proust, showing the end of this image of the court, this courtly, elegant style. Just as it was practically dead, it was dead at the time. It was an anachronistic film and an image, but it continues in a mini manner in Seoul today. It continues in a Starbucks if you want. And so that sense of looking to these pre-manufacturing contexts give us models for a post-industrial society today, illustrated most dramatically by the rise of cafes in Seoul and in Shanghai, where there's something like 12,000 or so cafes. I mean, far more than all of Paris are now in Shanghai, etc. Okay, so the two big answers are, one, to expand participation to include these many other things, and second, to look at past examples where this may have worked in ways that can inform us now, like the salon or the court, and where we then have examples of, say, just to take one example, the potato song. That was not, in a sense, that was a government-initiated program to change the diet of the Chinese from eating rice to eating the cheaper, more efficient to grow potato. And in terms of normal Chicago neoclassical economics, you can't change people's preferences, is an assumption which this refutes, that if you have a well-polished, and it wasn't created by the CCCP. This was created by Sister Potato herself. She just showed up and started singing her song, and you can see her as a dramatic illustration of, in a sense, a Chinese. I hadn't thought of this before. We can call her a Chinese Jane Jacobs. She was innovating in her own dramatic kind of context. Do you have my image playing there? I have
so Terry, you need to turn on your camera.
Okay. Darn, so it's my mistake. God, I thought I was confusing video with recording. That was my confusion there. It shows how adept I am at this stuff. So thank you, Alan, for keeping us going. So think of Sister Potato. Think of that in a sense as a difference in the content of the public participation, as was shown there. It's built also around consumption and the meaningfulness of eating a potato, where people will give you free tastes. And Sister Potato said, "Oh no, I can't. I won't give you a free sample. I have to make money." So she's deliberately showing not this, either ideologically pure, I'm helping the world, nor is she showing a Communist Party line. She's saying, I want to make money myself. So she's in that sense, she's a very interesting character as portrayed there, but potentially having major impacts. But what the reason we're featuring her is not to try to measure the impact so much as to say, in different contexts of the Chinese national political system, which in a sense is more like the continental as described by Habermas, that is not having open political debate in national elections. Nevertheless, you can have individuals like Jane Jacobs or Sister Potato make dramatic innovations. And that can happen even in this example, with the active support of the national state. In the case of Sister, they didn't tell her to write the song, but they're subsidizing the loans for irrigation of the desert and so forth. Okay, so do we other? I mean, I can go on, but let's maybe look at other questions if we have any others, Brandon, on your list there. Or from
there was
anyone else, speak up. You can it'd be fine to have an actual voice and a face if you want with a question now.
We had one, what's the difference between aesthetic and style? I feel like the words are often used interchangeably.
Yeah, I mean, aesthetics would be more the more philosophical statement of, or the articulation of a perspective of why do I wear a goth black outfit with white makeup and so forth, and what's the view that's trying to convey, and then the answer might be bohemian. That the image of me dressed this way says, I'm not dressing like all of you out there. I want to shock you a little bit, and she did. The style then could be her black outfit. So the style, I guess style has two meanings. Style can mean, say, the clothes, but style also has a second, more abstract meaning, which is almost more synonymous with aesthetics. So I would say in that more general, on that more general level, there is no precise, specific meaning or difference that you should be conscious of between aesthetics and style. I would use them more interchangeably. And I'm in my own presentation and thinking, I hate definitions and precise right or wrong wordings. Instead, try to get at the bigger ideas behind them.
We also have, going with your dislike of definitions, but with response to an actual person. In reference to Fleury, what does legitimate culture mean as opposed to mass culture? The syllabus uses the term.
Yeah, okay, legitimate is tricky here, and it has changing meanings. If one contrasts it with, I think probably in that sense, legitimate may imply more traditional legitimacy in the French context, which would mean things closer to the National Endowment for the Arts and the US list of so-called benchmarks, concerts, art museums, art galleries, and the like, versus, say, the popular culture on the other side of Michigan Avenue, where you have 20,000 people plus, and then something like 8 or 9 stages with performers going on through 4 months of the summer. Not every single night are they all filled, but they're massive numbers of people. But there's not one type, but these started with the classic most favorite, initially ethnically defined, such as gospel, jazz, hip hop, rap, coming up to house, and Christian rap, etc. At the same time, you then had more, and these are musical definitions, if you will, that may be linked with an ethnic or lifestyle minority. But the point is, these are not the I mean, the old meaning in the 50s or 60s, you would read people writing about high art and mass art, and that kind of class-defined definition of the arts has largely disappeared, not just because of the gaze of the writer, but because life is less class influenced. There is a breakdown of class politics, is the title of a book we did with Marty Lipset. In that way, you can still talk about, say, hip hop or gospel or jazz or rock, but that's different from talking about the proletariat. Then it becomes an open question. What's the magnitude of the relationship? What's the correlation coefficient between education or occupation and different types of music or film or whatever? And so we briefly brought in the 1968 emergence of what had been called the black film, the film noir, from the 1930s on, started by Bertolt Brecht and by Habermas, not Habermas, Adorno, Horkheimer, Brecht, others, with the American mystery writers in the 30s, but it took off and only crystallized and became super visible in 1968 with a Bonnie and Clyde movie. That is, in this sense, the Hollywood mass, I'm using the Adorno labeling in a strong sort of Marxist class manner here, embraced what had been seen as the anti-capitalist inspired art from the 1930s. And so you have a transformation of the audience into include visibly a counterculture, as it was then called, and an establishment culture. But when you have the counterculture getting bigger and bigger and bigger, as has arguably happened in much of Western Europe and the US, no longer does class politics have the meaning that it did before. Okay, so that's one way of answering that. We can elaborate on any of this, but you have anybody want to? How about a student who wants to let us see a face or hear? Even Brandon's even a name as someone who's here today who wants to either articulate. I mean, maybe even one of the persons who asked those questions, if they want to follow up or say any more or ask any more, or anybody else, even if you didn't write the question, or apply it to a new context, like how about my town in Mississippi, or how about my town in another place, or my interest in this kind of music, or whatever. I deliberately mentioned music because there's a lot more writing in text form about music than there is about paintings or even architecture, perhaps. And music theory there are many examples that Max Weber uses in writing about the Protestant ethic and even capitalism, which are taken from music, the classicism, the rationality that you can find in different kinds of music, from Bach to Mozart, and then the anti-revolution of Wagner and others in the 19th century that deeply transformed classical music, and then the subjectivism that you can get in some music, but in contrast to saying having a chorus where you have theme A versus theme B, or the theme and then the orchestra playing a background, or harmony. These kinds of explicit, quite semi-technical but very precise concepts can be illustrated more simply and clearly with music, perhaps, than they can with a Picasso painting. as I think you're seeing in my answers, I'm explicitly trying to bring in things which cross disciplines, which use ideas which are important for driving the production economy and the consumption economy, for driving political decisions or work within the context of different kinds of political regimes in Versailles or London. And third, how these affect lifestyle and housing, family patterns, and how the small housing, as well as the doubling in Seoul. Heeson pointed out that the doubling in the number of households, including persons living alone, this has doubled in Seoul in the last 10 years. There's no change in the US in the same 10 years. So she relates that to the weakening of the family and to the rise of cafes as a sort of new, more neutral, egalitarian public space, instead of having the grandmother tell you that the curfew is 8 o'clock, young lady, and you be back here and you can go to your room at 8 o'clock. Okay, so some have related the earlier rise of social media and the internet in Korea to that strong grandmother, where the young daughter could go to her room and still be a revolutionary over the internet. Okay, and that's still happening around the world for sure, but it's now happening more in person with a big change in just the last 10 years. And all these factors that I'm mentioning here, economic, political, and social, are generating one of the fundamental concepts of scene. That is, the scene, and thinking explicitly about the scene as an analyzable entity is a very new way of thinking about how the economy works. So it's not a denial of the market, but it adds more richness. It says, you know, there's not just one market. There may be 2, 3, 4, 5 sub-markets that follow different dynamics. You can have traders that are doing things short-term, hour by hour. You can have fundamental investors. And then third, you can have people who may be thinking in ways that fit with their own distinctive lifestyles. And they may be buying and selling Starbucks shares that follow different dynamics from Peet's Coffee or Caribou, or in the case of Seoul, those 18,000 cafes, mostly something like 2 or 3%, even though there are more Starbucks in Seoul than any other city in the world, they're only about 2 or 3% of all the cafes in Seoul. Most of those cafes in Seoul are individually owned and created, or they're small companies. They're not these big corporations. So in that sense, there's an individualization feeding into the dynamics of markets and to potentially shifting the way political systems work. In the example, say, of the cafe in Seoul or the potato, I don't know quite what it was, if it was a conference, a show, a part of something bigger where she was speaking, but it wasn't a political rally of the CCCP. It was not a church ceremony, as in a New England town. It was not the military. That it was the feel was more of a third space of people eating out. And so the whole idea of nightlife, as we saw in our Qiji presentation, that something like 60% of the Chinese economy is nightlife, and that happens with the photos were very revelatory of lots of consumption, people walking through the streets, looking for ways of entertaining and quasi-leisurely activities. This is not the normal image one has of people in a factory or exporting or not exporting masks, which we get from the American media more often, with press releases coming from the White House or other places. Other questions?
That was everything I had. So unless others have stuff they want to raise. Madison Pearson.
Hi, Hi, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the term buzz strike.
Wow. Yeah, can you remind me the strike part? The buzz I remember, but oh, you mean, yeah. Remind me, strike. What's the strike? I'm trying to recall myself what the strike part was.
Yeah, I think it's the withdrawal of buzz. It's within Scenescapes chapter 6, I
Okay,
believe.
so withdrawal of buzz. Yes, I mean, we lead into the idea of buzz with the analysis of money and markets, and make the point that and this is a direct extension of what I've just been saying, that markets are not a uniform homogeneous entity. There are many things which are going on, and so you can think of a measure of this as the amount of money floating around or circulating in a national or a global economic system. And much of the economy today is global. There's one book which even made the whole book made the point that China and the US are not two, they are one economy. They do different things. They divide up labor, and there are many different firms within the US and with China, but if you separate totally China and the US, you're denying or attempting to deny the huge integration and the mutual strengths that they each bring to one another. And this comes out with the idea that there's a circulatory medium of money, but we can also talk of things like pharmaceutical equipment, gloves, masks, and so forth, which were more commonly produced in larger volume in China. But the point of the example was that, so Parsons then took this idea and wrote about power and so we shift then from economics to political science and social theory, that power is a circulatory medium. And that in turn leads to the idea of buzz. So buzz is not just gossip, which is in a column. The power of gossip is to extend the confidence and the range of a particular tweet, policy statement, conception of a potato in ways that can extend the uses of a product like a potato, to stay with that example, and the sales of potatoes can then rise inside China in ways that more money will circulate within the Chinese economy because potatoes have become an active part in addition to rice. And the Chinese are importing. That is, it's not just that the basic stuff comes from China. The basic stuff for rice and for soybeans. I mean, the largest export driving the Illinois economy is soybeans. And just one anecdote on that: when the price of soybeans dropped a couple of decades ago, the governor of Illinois got in a World War II fighter jet and flew to Tokyo and said, "You people, raise the price of soybeans. Our farmers are suffering." And so, he was trying, in that publicity stunt, obviously, he was trying to make the market into one actor who could respond to one threat, him coming in a World War II fighter, flying all the way through Alaska, et cetera. Showed in that sense the interdependence of the world in these different ways. At the same time, we could, and this was not in the video, but it was in a longer BBC version that I heard. Sister Potato came from one region, and when they calculated the prices, and you could buy potatoes from different regions, they marked them. Her region's potatoes have increased in price dramatically more than other regions nearby. So not only was her song selling just her own, the ones which she grew, the whole region nearby her benefited more than the potatoes grown 50 or 100 miles away. So in that sense, the market reflected the success of her song and her promotion of potatoes it also specifically gave her a private benefit of a higher price. And in that sense, that little dynamic, this micro example I'm giving you, this may not affect the global economy very much, but it can reflect the people growing potatoes in those 2 or 3 adjacent counties a lot. So in that sense, markets work in ways that they can give information that can be very local if you have the local knowledge about investment buyers and sellers and so forth. At the same time that it feeds into the Chinese national economy and to the global economy, giving China the ability to buy more iPhones or Ford cars or something else, or soybeans, which are exported from the U.S. to China. So in that manner, the buzz about the potato through the song, through her PR style presentation of herself and the potato ideal, is buzz in a perfect sort of way, as manifested in its impact through markets and pricing. So we can combine the political, the social, and the buzz with the modern dynamic. I won't say only modern. This has been there for a long time, but people just didn't pay attention to it. And so we're not disagreeing with anything from Alfred Marshall in 19th century economics or Gary Becker's human capital idea, where he stressed that smart ideas can make the economy go further. What I'm saying is consistent with much of what's going on within the economics discipline today, that we're having all different kinds of new processes, new variables. Economists are doing studies on happiness more generally. They're opening boxes and opening windows they never did before. And in that way, there's more of an interpenetration between the social sciences and the methods and the data across these fields, which capture more the actual dynamics of something like Sister Potato, rather than say all that China does is export, masks to the rest of the world. So it's not just production, it's also consumption. And then we get the flaneur. Imagine the flaneur going in the Paris arcades wearing a mask. Okay, and how much does that transfer the flaneur? How much is this working through the internet? And that's this is what's all over the media right now. I mean, how much are our lives changing because we're using Zoom? Well, at least one measure is the Zoom stock is going through the roof. But that's a way of capturing the specifically in the price of one security, how these bigger dynamics are changing our lives. And if someone comes up with a different app, a different way of doing this, that Weibo and so forth, these things are actively being changed and analyzed and reinterpreted. So that's a quick answer. So then similarly, to bring in dropping or strike or inflation or deflation, these terms from economics can be applied to buzz, at least as first ways of thinking about the structure of buzz markets or buzz conflicts, in a political sense of conflict, or in a social sense of buzz imitation. I want to imitate the style of the song, and I want to sell another product, such as soybeans or cucumbers or whatever. Can I make a song about cucumbers and do that? So in that way we can have I'm suggesting the value and the importance of paying attention to buzz. Gary Becker himself, top economist here for Transform the Discipline to think about issues more broadly, did a paper on buzz. And he said one way of measuring it is to look at the length of a line in front of restaurants. And if you've got a long line, that implies that restaurant has more buzz. And so if you're starting a new restaurant, maybe what you can do is invite a lot of your friends and have give away free meals so that you can generate long lines when the restaurant first opens in a place like Greenwich Village. There's huge competition, but if you can really give the impression that you've got the longest lines and you're the hottest restaurant in Greenwich Village, then you must be doing something pretty darn good in the kitchen. Okay, so that's an example of how Gary himself wrote about buzz in ways that was decades before the general thinking about. So I'm using him to say economists have been there from the beginning and thinking and articulating and theorizing seriously about amenities defined as non-market goods. A restaurant can thus be both a market good when you pay your bill, but it can also be an amenity for Greenwich Village. So if you have lots of restaurants with long lines and people standing in the street with their newspapers talking, you're creating a sidewalk transformation of exactly the sort that Jane Jacobs said reduces crime, increases sociability, increases people's feelings of having eyes on the street, which is an intermediary idea which reduces conflict and crime because people feel being trusted, they're being part of a community in that loose sense with eyes watching them and they're part of it, and they feel more comfortable and confident and don't worry about security. Okay. Les.
I mean, doesn't it push against at least some strands of economic thought? So it's like if we like if we're under like a rational choice model or something, it's like that wouldn't be able to explain like why the potatoes would be going up in one place rather than another, right? Because it's like the rational choice actor, if they want a potato, they would just go to like the cheaper like potato version. Or if like the restaurant has a long line, you just go to a different restaurant that like doesn't have a long line.
Well,
or maybe not.
That I would say this shows Brandon's imputing the illustration and the meaning of rational and saying it's rational to buy a cheaper potato, whereas I would ask even Brandon, does that seem the only rational decision is to buy the cheapest potato or to buy a potato at all?
I mean, I don't think so, but it's like, I'm not an economist, so it's like, and it's like some of these things seem like, I don't know, I just get excited when I feel like I can, like, whatever.
No,
stick it to the economists, but
and that's a common pattern among sociologists and some political scientists is divided. I'm making the point that we have but there's economists themselves fight against each other for sure. And so Gary was fought against by others who would say, no, that's not rational. But then they talk and they argue, and you say, okay, you're using rational a different way from me. So Gary would say, if it's got more people in the line, we don't know what they're actually getting in the kitchen, and we don't know what's actually in the preference of the consumer waiting in the line. But we do know there is a line. And so in that sense, that's illustrating the concept of buzz as he wrote about it. And so, but he, in a sense, you could say he was rational in saying, or I put differently, I would say the easiest resolution is don't worry about what is rational or what is quote public choice, because 90% of the content, the actual content, such as should you buy the cheapest potato or not, or should you buy one from Sister Potato's region or not, I wouldn't try to call one of those rational and the other irrational. I would say those are two specific choices we can talk about, and then one can then apply or not apply terms like rational to them, as that is, the term rational is so general and vague, and enhanced by the fact that economists classically say we don't want to deal with the specific content of preferences. We leave that to others like sociologists. But as economists are moving away from that, and they're actually talking about preferences and the content of happiness in ways that used to be done only by, or say done more by sociologists, we're having an interpenetration of all these disciplines, and new young economists are doing all kinds of stuff that are all over the lot, inspired by Gary, not only, but especially by Gary Brecher, who deliberately was breaking all these kinds of rules. And he was professor of economics, and thanks to me in part, he was professor of sociology. And so he was And so he read a lot of stuff. Jim Heckman, here, Nobel Prize winner today, more than half of his books are sociology books on his wall. And he's trying to model labor markets in ways that incorporate rather than fight against the things which he's reading on his walls. And his wife was a former graduate student who worked with me as a research assistant.
Yeah,
So
I guess I just have in mind specifically that kind of like profit maximizing, you know, kind of idea of how people make decisions, which gets sometimes associated with rational choice theory, but it's like that's I agree with what you're saying.
But in that sense, maybe the reason they put into the video the woman who came along and said, "Can I have a free sample?" And Sister Potato said, "No, I need to make money." Maybe you could say they put that in to show she's profit maximizing too.
Mm.
Whereas right after that, there was another person who came to her and said, "Would you like one of my free samples?" And she tasted it. So we have two conflicting examples of what is private behavior. One, and is this rational? Is this a market? I mean, I would say these illustrate the ambivalence of those more general concepts and the ways that they can be variously illustrated in this very concrete example. And none of these is right or wrong in an absolute sense or black and white. They illustrate the interpenetration and or put more better, the transformation of these traditional concepts to apply to new areas like changing or trying to expand the range of tastes, which is, you know, revolutionary for economists, for, let's say, for traditional Western economists to do. So I'm not disagreeing. I'm trying to find ways of changing the context and some of the labels of these things so that we can integrate and learn from one another, as well as saying, okay, I mean, you can use the term or your conception of profit maximization, but it looks to me as that's not as useful as doing something else. But I guess what I'm saying is disciplinary labels are often not very helpful. There are huge variations within the social sciences or within art history. You've got all kinds of, there's a full professor of economics who's doing full-time art history. David, what's his name?
Allison.
Yeah. So forth. And who presented a paper in Gary Becker's workshop with all the same standard economists there. And they said, "What's your evidence for that?" And he said, "Well, Picasso wrote a letter in 1923 to so-and-so. And he said in that letter," and he didn't present any econometrics. Those were his data. And people said, "Well, okay, that's a compelling point." So the lines are not always so clear. We're at the end of our time, folks. Thank you for being tolerant, and we hope we're helping to expand some concepts and thinking. And most of all, the idea of the exam is to help you, give you an opportunity to review and codify and put together. I mean, I used to feel that way, that, you know, just before an exam, you know, I'd say, wow, these pieces do fit together more than I'd realized when I was just reading one book at a time. So enjoy that feeling and try to, you know, look for ways to continue that in the future, and use the exams as a way of trying to consciously synthesize what you know, and that's the big takeaway. But you're all going to do well on the exam. That is, I say that based on I taught 3 courses this year. We've had nobody. And if I didn't say this before, the fall and the winter, we did not have a single bad exam, even though we had 130 students in the winter. I read the lowest graded exams from the TAs. We didn't have, I mean, 5-10 years ago, there would have been a lot of exams much lower at the bottom. So, and this new word, which may not have come out officially, but the USC now has just gotten new data on there are massive numbers of people who are applying here. 80% of those who are offered acceptance actually do accept and come to Chicago. et cetera. And we're right next to Harvard and Stanford in ways that was not true, a couple of decades ago. So the quality of you students is very, very high, and it's wonderful to see and to experience. And the questions we're having here, the conversations, and the exams which we read, and you can enjoy and learn from. Yeah, let me add one more point, even though it's getting late. We want to try to explore more new ways of helping you participate, thinking about and trying out a couple of options for more student participation in this course. In the second half of the course, as we've now read the big ideas, let's think of ways of teaching where we can either have student presentations or ways of engaging you more as students in participating in the course. And if you have things to send ideas or talk in office hours with us, we'd love to explore some of that. Okay. Any last word from any student first or our TAs? Okay. Well, thank you all. It looks as if things have moved very smoothly. And we will continue with the exam, and then next Monday with next part of the course. Bye-bye. Okay, I'm gonna have to, yeah, if I didn't say so to our TAs, I've got, unfortunately, a public meeting right now, 6 o'clock, I'm 3 minutes late, with on the Michael Reese public reuse theme that I had to go to a meeting for once before. So I will wave goodbye unless you have a last very quick thing, anybody? Okay.
Yeah, we'll get everything ready for the Wednesday. Yeah, sure.
He's gone.
Yeah.
Do we have anything to talk about, or are we good?
Hi, sorry. Is this?
Oh,
can I
is there
ask a
someone?
very